Silence in the court.
Welcome to my podcast episode 1, where we will be diving into the intriguing world of true crime and literature. Today, we will be discussing and analyzing the infamous Hosack murder trial and its connection to Susan Glaspell's play, Trifles. This real-life murder case and its fictional adaptation offer different perspectives and interpretations of the same event, making for a fascinating comparison. I am your presiding host Siraji Omar and my narrator Suzanne. Welcome for joining me, Suzanne.
Thank you. My pleasure to help you put the message across. Today, we will be discussing and analyzing the infamous Hosack murder trial and its connection to Susan Glaspell's play, Trifles. This real-life murder case and its fictional adaptation offer different perspectives and interpretations of the same event, making for a fascinating comparison. As a student of literature at STCC, I was intrigued by the idea of comparing real-life murder and trial with Glaspell's play. Both present different perspectives and interpretations of the same event. To fulfill this final comparison project, I decided to create a podcast that delves into the similarities and differences between the two. To begin with, let's take a closer look at the background of the Hosack murder trial. John and Margaret Hosack were a married couple living on a farm in Iowa with their children. The Hosack murder trial, also known as the Midnight Assassin case, was a widely publicized and controversial murder case that took place in Iowa in 1900. The case involved the murder of John Hosack by his wife Margaret Hosack, who was accused of killing her husband with an axe while he slept. The trial gained significant attention from the media due to its sensationalized headlines and biased opinions. Margaret was often portrayed as a cold-blooded murderer, with newspapers painting her as a woman who was unhappy in her marriage and capable of committing such a heinous crime. However, upon researching further and reading through court documents, it became clear that there was more to the story than what was portrayed in the media. This real-life event gained even more attention when it inspired Susan Glaspell to write her one-act play, Trifles. Trifles is a one-act play by Susan Glaspell that explores themes of gender roles, justice, and societal expectations. The story unfolds in a rural farmhouse where a group of men, law enforcement, and legal officials investigate the murder of John Wright. Meanwhile, two women, Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters, accompany them and quietly observe the domestic space. As the men dismiss household details as insignificant trifles, the women uncover crucial evidence, a dead canary with a wrung neck, that reveals Mrs. Wright's emotional suffering and the motive behind the crime. The play highlights the contrast between male and female perspectives on justice and the overlooked intelligence of women in a patriarchal society. The Hosack murder trial and Susan Glaspell's Trifles serve as parallel examinations of gender dynamics and justice, illustrating how societal biases shape perceptions of guilt and innocence.
Welcome back to our podcast episode 2. I am your presiding host Siraji Omar. It's December 2nd, 1900, on a rural Iowa farm. The quiet of night is shattered when John Hosack, a well-respected farmer, is found dead in his bed. He has been brutally attacked with an axe. His wife, Margaret Hosack, claims she was asleep and heard nothing. But the community quickly suspects her. John had long been an authoritarian figure in the household. Neighbors whispered that Margaret endured years of mistreatment, though others saw her as a cold and calculating woman. The question remained, was this murder an act of self-preservation, or was there a hidden motive? Margaret was arrested. In a trial that gripped the region, prosecutors argued that she struck the fatal blows out of long-standing resentment. Her defense maintained that an unknown intruder had committed the crime. Now, was Margaret really guilty, or had she been unfairly painted as a murderer because of societal biases? The newspapers turned Margaret into a villain before the trial had even begun. Sensationalized headlines called her the Midnight Murderess, portraying her as an unstable wife with a hidden rage. Rather than examining the reality of her marriage, the press fixated on courtroom theatrics, dramatizing every moment of her trial. The emphasis was not on whether she was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but on whether she fit society's image of what a grieving widow should look like. The trial became a spectacle, with newspapers portraying her as either a cold-blooded murderer or a victim of an oppressive marriage. Despite her claims of innocence, a jury of 12 men found her guilty in the first trial, sentencing her to life in prison. However, after a year in prison, the Iowa Supreme Court overturned the verdict on appeal, and she was eventually released. Welcome back to our podcast episode 3. I am your host Siraji Omar. Now let us look at the background and the origin of the one-act play called Trifles. Years after the trial and conviction of Margaret Hossack, Glaspell transformed the story into Trifles, a one-act play that reimagined the crime through a feminist lens. Instead of focusing on legal evidence, the play highlights the emotional and psychological suffering of Minnie Wright, the fictionalized version of Margaret Hossack. The male investigators in Trifles dismissed seemingly insignificant details and referred to them like an unfinished sewing project and a dead canary, while the women recognized them as crucial clues to Minnie's isolation and despair. Susan Glaspell drew inspiration for Trifles from the real-life murder trial of Margaret Hossack, which she covered as a young journalist for the Des Moines Daily News in 1900 to 1901. Trifles, a one-act play written by Susan Glaspell in 1916, tells the story of a murder investigation in a rural farmhouse. The Hossack murder trial, on the other hand, occurred in 1900 in Iowa and involved the conviction of Margaret Hossack for the murder of her husband. Although these two examples may seem vastly different from each other, they both shed light on the flaws and inequalities within the criminal justice system. In Trifles, we see a group of men investigating a murder while their wives accompany them. The women, who are not taken seriously by their husbands or the sheriff, discover crucial evidence that ultimately leads to solving the case. This play highlights the lack of respect and agency given to women in society during that time period. The men focus on gathering evidence that supports their preconceived notions about the case, ignoring anything that may contradict their beliefs. On the other hand, the women pay attention to details that are often deemed insignificant but turn out to be crucial in solving the case. Through their conversations and actions, we learn that Mrs. Wright was isolated and unhappy in her marriage, just like Margaret Hossack. The play also highlights the disregard for women's opinions and experiences in a male-dominated society and the disregards of the little nuances called trifles those men failed to record. By focusing on the trifles or seemingly insignificant details, Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale, who were also the wives of the investigators, are able to piece together what truly happened in the murder of John Wright. The play explores themes of isolation, unhappiness, and the disregard of women's experiences. The trifles dismissed by the men as an unfinished sewing project, a broken birdcage, and a dead canary ultimately exposed the truth behind the crime. One aspect that I found intriguing was how Glaspell added another act to the play that covers information from the real murder. In this act, we see Mrs. Peters discover a dead canary, which she believes was killed by John Wright. This canary symbolizes Minnie's life before her marriage, that was filled with freedom and joy, which was taken away when she married John.
Welcome back to our podcast episode 4. I am your narrator Suzanne, and together with the host Siraji Omar. In this episode, we will be analyzing the similarities and contrast between these fascinating works. Now let's begin. The Hosack trial and the play Trifles may appear as two separate stories at the beginning, but in fact, they have many points in common. Both works are concerned with the issues of murder, justice, and gender roles, and the two works present two different images of the main characters. In this episode, we will try to make a more detailed comparison between the Hosack trial and Trifles and the victims, the characters, symbolism, and the personal depth that Margaret Hosack's letters brought into the story. Firstly, the victims in the Hosack trial and in Trifles, Margaret Hosack and Minnie Wright, respectively, have many features in common. They are both shown as obedient wives who have been oppressed by their husbands. Margaret is a farmer's wife who is always scolded and mocked by her husband for not being able to bear children. In the same way, Minnie in Trifles is a housewife who has been confined to the house and emotionally tormented by her husband. Both women are also described as quiet and calm, which suggests their suppressed feelings and unmet needs. Then, the second point of comparison is that the Hosack trial and Trifles show two different images of the main characters. In the Hosack trial, Margaret is depicted as a bloodthirsty killer by the prosecutor. They make her out to be a monster who killed her husband in a fit of anger due to his constant nagging and infidelity. On the other hand, in Trifles, Minnie is portrayed in a gentler way as seen by the female characters. They know what she is going through in patriarchal society and try to understand and feel for her. This difference between a criminal and a victim's portrayal in both stories gives the reader a chance to think about their own interpretation of the characters. We will be right back.
Silence in the court.
Welcome back to our podcast episode 5. I am your narrator Suzanne, and together with the host Siraji Omar. As we come to the end of this journey through the Hosack murder trial and Susan Glaspell's Trifles, one thing becomes clear: stories shape our understanding of justice. Whether presented through the lens of historical fact or literary fiction, these narratives challenge us to reconsider guilt, innocence, and the societal forces that influence both. What we perceive as truth is often molded by the perspectives that frame it. So, as we close, I leave you with how many stories have shaped your view of justice and how many truths remain hidden in the details we overlook. That being said, let's look at our final episode serving as the conclusion of the Hosack murder trial and Susan Glaspell's Trifles. The two episodes told through different lenses offer two different perspectives on the same event, highlighting the complexities of human behavior and societal norms. The Hosack trial and Trifles reveal how societal and gender biases shape narratives of crime. Literature serves as a tool to challenge dominant perspectives, offering alternative viewpoints that force us to reconsider justice. Through this podcast, we have explored how these two mediums present their interpretations and shed light on important themes such as gender roles, oppression, and perception. As we reflect on these two versions of the same event, we must ask, how do we judge women accused of crimes? And how does the framing of a story influence our perception of guilt and innocence? I hope this discussion has piqued your interest to learn more about this intriguing case and its impact on literature. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of true crime and literature. Visit Springfield Technical Community College to see other amazing talents about this work. Thanks for joining us with Echoes of Evidence. Until next time, keep questioning the narratives we take for granted.